But I want to start actually with the last point and then move back. Okay, and I'm going to give you the mic as being in the mainstream. The youth voices heard not just for the youth, but for everybody, and you will have the mic soon to say what it is exactly that you want beyond the methodology of doing things. Okay, but before that, I want to ask about the scale, because you're making actually a very, very interesting point. Okay, this idea that not everything needs to be scaled up. Scaled up does not mean necessarily the small project becoming a big project, but that the fact it is repetitive, that it can be repeated successfully, not something that can be done only at the micro. Just a second to turn this off. Sorry, guys. Only time I forgot not to put my phone on airplane mode. Okay, so let me go on to you, Hannah. Okay, on the scale thing. Okay, tell me a little bit about the projects that can help the community. Okay, they need not necessarily be bigger and implemented at the regional level, but that can be replicated as a business model, let's put it this way, to benefit the community as a whole. Do you have examples for such projects?
I do, fortunately I do. So I've mentored a fantastic Ugandan startup earlier this year. They're called EcoPlastal. They collect plastic waste and they transform this plastic waste into roof tiles that is then used for roofing, hospitals, social housing, and so on. They've been in place for 4 years now, and they are scaling their activities outside of Uganda with leads in Rwanda, but mostly in Kenya. I very much believe in what they do. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. We all suffer from the consequences of having so much plastic and having seen the rise of plastic use in our consumption in the last 20, 30 years. And also from countries making a decision to receive such waste for money for northern countries. So here there's a fantastic opportunity to help them. They are in conversations, they need support. I can tell you about other initiatives that are more nonprofit led in Morocco. Same thing, waste management, but for to transform this waste into energy. You have also food waste management, so to redistribute food, because there's, again, in rich areas in Morocco and actually in the culture, there's a lot of food waste. Every household has an immense percentage of the food they're making going into waste, or there's a kind of a culture of redistribution through say large gathering, the couscous on the Fridays, everyone eats and so on. But we could do so much better. It requires from us to question our culture of consumption. It requires from us to also question how, like, sobriety is something that can be brought with a mindset of abundance, and it's conversations that need to be held at the family level on what we consume, what gets out. Can we bring, again, transparency at this level, so that we feel more comfortable bringing this at a community level, at a city level, at a village level, at a regional level, and so on and so forth. So we're not in shortage of amazing projects. I mean, I can put on the chat so many other projects that I've seen, that I've heard of, or that I've eventually participated in. Again, coming back to the point of Pato earlier, yes, we need people to get out of the way. So entrepreneurs that are passionate, competent, driven, and they want to do the work. So this enabling environment. But I would come back to the funding again. Sometimes you need funding. Actually, most of the time you need funding. And if you compare to any region around the world, if we want to do something meaningful, we need people to chip in and invest, and we need business leaders, private sectors to say they believe in the youth, and they believe in youth-led solutions. And that comes not just symbolically, but actually pragmatically with a substantial funding that, again, can be brought into a transparent level. I dream of a Brighter Bridges, I'll put it in the chat, Brighter Bridges platform, where every possible funding resources is accessible and people understand how to access this. And so we can make success stories really rise and drive a lot of the ecosystem towards climate solutions, youth-led climate solutions.
Okay, great, great. Let me go to Sojoud now. Okay, Hannah mentioned the individuals and things starting at the family level. Okay, from your line of work on communication and on understanding relations among people, do you see families and individuals seeing their responsibility towards the climate problem, or it's too far away from them? What do you think?
For me, I think it's still far away. People think of climate change, they don't see the individual level of it. So they don't say, let's limit my plastic use. They don't say, I should be very careful with my recycling. They, like she said, they don't say, I should cook exactly how much I want to eat and not waste food. That level of attention to detail and awareness of like individual consumption is definitely not clear here. But also there is no accountability to big companies. So the private sector here has no corporate social responsibility, especially companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and they create most of the waste from like plastic bottles. They don't have a cleanup strategy. They are not social responsible. They don't put anything into the community, while they just extract a lot of money from the community. They're targeted mostly to young people. So corporate social responsibility is not a concept that young people call for or enforce these companies. We don't have a culture of holding companies accountable, boycotting companies that don't participate in improving the environment or cleaning up after themselves, or supporting scholarship education. None of that. The companies here, especially international conglomerate, huge companies, they are very extractive when it comes to Sudan. They don't at all put any money back in. All the money they put in is advertising to generate more income for themselves, and they're never held accountable to clean the mess they create, to add value into the communities themselves. So that is definitely an educational curve that needs to be aligned. It's a cultural change. People need to learn to ask these companies to clean up after themselves before they come in, before they enter a community, a neighborhood, to be asked, what are you adding into this community? We know you're extracting, but what value are you adding into the community? How are you going to clean this up? How are you, going to be a good neighbor to everybody? So that concept is definitely missing here. So they see themselves as a godsend. We're bringing you this product, but they're taking resources, they're taking money. None of it is being invested back in the country, and it's just transferred into hard currency and leaving the country. So in that sense, there is not good, sustainable or good financing that brings the country back value.
We have in Egypt, from the big companies, Nestle, for instance, so water company, they do have little booth where you can put back the old plastic bottles, and you can actually get coupons or retrieve coins and stuff like that. You don't have this in Sudan?
No, we don't have any of that in Sudan. There are young boys who collect it and like go for like street children who are not, they collect the plastic bags and trek for miles and miles to go sell them to recycling places. But the customer themselves, we don't have that culture of going into the grocery store, exchanging your plastic or cans or even glass bottles for money. And we have lots of things in plastic and lots of things in bottles. And we also don't have any of the co-op idea of buying what you want in reusable bags at all. Everything is like individually packaged in plastic. And we have a very bad model of waste management, which is just landfills and incinerators. We don't even have incinerators generating heat that the Europeans have, because we don't need heat. It's a very hot country. So that energy is just wasted energy. It just goes into landfills, and then it's, centuries for plastic to break. So we don't have a good waste management system at all. Food management or food waste there is a lot of entrepreneurs working on composting, urban gardens, that kind of thing. And they're teaching people, and there is Al-Zirri'a Sudani, Al-Muzara'a Sudani. These are small NGO groups that teach people how to create gardens in their homes, because we have huge homes with like lots of plots of land, and neighborhoods have garden spaces. So that's something that's taking place. So they'll teach you how to plant tomatoes and mint and things. So, you know, you cut on your spending and you're planting edible plants.
Okay, thank you so much. Back to you, Pato. Small questions, and then I'm going to have a full round with really the mic with you. You are in COP27. What do you say? All right, so be ready for this. But a question for you first, because again, back to the scale issue. Okay, sometimes projects need to be scaled up to be economical. Okay, in economics, there's something called economies of scale, which means that if you can produce something, it would cost a lot if it's done at a very small scale, but if it is done at a larger scale, it will cost a lot less. How would you feel about that in some of the ideas that you suggested? Would you discard altogether the scaling up, or do you discard it in a certain sense?
I understand where you're coming from in terms of economies of scale, but the challenge now is we've got a project that's working well and serving, let's say, a community of 500 people, and it's going absolutely well. Marginal profits, but it's going well. And then alternatively, we then decide to scale that project up to 5,000 people, so 10 times bigger. And that then turns to marginal profits to, yes, it worked for the first 100, and then the other 400 was just because we said we wanted to scale, and all that 400 becomes a sunk cost. I'm not saying that we shouldn't scale. I'm saying that we shouldn't throw out ideas on the basis that they can't scale. Sometimes an idea is for a community. It works because it was tailor-made for that community, taking into consideration their culture, their tradition, what they have available to them, what they have available to them for free, their cost of production or cost of just engaging in whatever this project may be. So I'm not saying that scaling is always wrong, but I am saying that we need to be careful with always expecting to scale projects.
Okay, that's actually specific enough. Okay, we don't throw out ideas because they can't scale if it's already working and doing well as it stands and helping the community. Okay, settle down, Hannah. You need to settle down because I'm going to ask a tough question now. So you need to sit down somewhere. You're walking. Sit down. Thank you.
Yes, right. I'm settled now. Ready for the tough question.
Good, good. Now the tough question. And Pato is the one that actually that held the first flag here. Okay, and she said, we do not want to be talking in youth forums. We're talking to each other and clapping to each other. We want to be part of mainstream so that the ones who are taking the decisions can hear us out. Okay, so if you actually have the mic now on mainstream and you are saying exactly what you want, not the generalities. We already have the generalities on the process. We want it to be a participatory process. We want monitoring and evaluation. We want to be involved. But what would you ask for specifically, okay, on how to deal if you are in charge of the climate fire and you have a chance to talk to the international community, the donor agencies, the big countries, the ones that are doing all the emissions, et cetera, what would you say to speak up the young voice of Africa? What would you say, Hannah?
I would say we are at a stage now where it's very clear that we need a revolution in terms of how we do business, taking into account the only shareholder that matters, which is planet Earth, or planet water, as a matter of fact, because there's more water than Earth, if we so technically look at it. And we all need water. And at this point, if we go with a business mindset, with very clear objectives, with KPIs, with everyone ready to kind of heed those objectives and this performance, then we restructure fundamentally the aid development industry, the transparency that goes with it, so that we can privilege and emphasize and amplify the projects that do make sense and discard those that do not make sense, and find ways, positive nudges and incentives, but also negative nudges and things to remove from the way those that are dramatically damaging the planet and that are still, and in the African continent, it's still very clear. In the industrial space, there are ways that to do business that are so colonial still, with a massive damage, and we let them be because that's the way governments still are in place, because that's the way business is still in place. So for me at this point, it's saying that the youth is more and more aware, a lot more educated, and ready to tackle those challenges that need support, and they need to be let down. This revolution of the way we do business in a super competent manner.
Okay, very strong messages. Okay, Sojoud, what would you say? You're holding the same mic now.
I think for our friends in the Northern Hemisphere, we need to, first of all, clearly acknowledge that the climate change crisis is an industrial revolution byproduct, something that Africa has not participated in, but bearing the brunt of. So it's a legacy of colonialism that just needs a reparation approach to fix this crisis. So while we never had mass industrialization, we are having catastrophic byproduct of it. And it's linked to everything, to immigration that Europe is suffering from. And we are a young population and they are an aging population. They need to keep that in mind. And numbers, we outnumber them very clearly. So this is something that Europeans just need to come to terms with. Americans need to get serious with this Paris Accords. It's a first world problem that developing worlds have to suffer from. So their commitment needs to be clear and involved and not superiority led. They need to be able to listen to young people from the countries that this affects the most, Asia and Africa included. And the whole models of waste being generated in Europe and America and being dealt with in Asia and Africa, that is not sustainable. While we here are working for food security and stability and immigration because of climate change, they need to work on waste reduction, creating more energy efficient cars and transportation systems and things that cut emissions from their side of the world. And while their social responsibility on this side of the planet is to engage with young people, not with governments. Engaging with governments in Africa is futile. They're bureaucratic, they're not representative, they're not democratic, so they don't reflect the people that they're governing. It's a nation run by dictators. All of African countries are. So to bypass them and work with youth through initiatives that highlight the importance of youth, like the two ladies said, empowering of youth, engaging youth at a very small level and moving up until we get youth parliaments, until African youth are able to be in government positions. I feel the environmental change has to just, in each and every African country, has to be run by young people, NGOs that are run by young people, business models that are run by young people. It can't be the way it is right now, that they engage governments and hope that this trickles down and that it changes. It's not working, and they have to change that model. They need to engage young people where they are in the initiatives they have and support them that way if they hope for this change to engulf the whole continent.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's also very good, very, very clear. Pato.
So mine would be, we can't expect Africa to carry the weight of the climate crisis after we carried the weight of the global northern countries' development. less it not being fair. Just economically, it doesn't make sense. The fact that countries are still extracting from Africa financially, clearly they see the value in Africa. And from that value, we need this to be spread more equitably. And I'm speaking specifically to the loss and damage finance facility that we're currently calling for. Our leaders, and then now addressing our African leaders, we need to stop going to COP27 with begging bowls. We hold power and we need to lean into that power. Yes, we're going through the most in terms of how much damage the climate crisis is causing in terms of extreme events. But if there's going to be a solar, if people are going to continue to lean on solar and so forth, they need African minerals. As people talk about carbon credits and so forth, they're talking about doing that on African land. So we need to lean into our power. And when we go to COP27, know that we're not going there to beg. We're going there to deal with people who are on par with us. For as long as we choose not to exercise our power, we might as well not have any. For as long as we go to COP27 and act like we're less than the people we're on the platform with, we might as well be less, because we will not demand, and thus we will not get what we deserve when it comes to addressing climate action as a continent and on a globe. And then I'll close by saying that we're calling this an African COP, but can we really call this an African COP if the global north, and specifically Africa, is one of the regions that's lost the most, and Africa as one of the countries, as one of the continents that has been damaged the most because of the climate crisis, does not get a loss and damage facility that will ensure that we at least are able to breathe through the loss and damage and continue to live on the world. It's not about saving Africa, it's about saving all of ourselves as a race. We're not asking for favors. We're saying that people should do favors for themselves, and we will help them to see a few more years. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. You're three very strong speakers. If we put you on actually there, you are going to make a very big difference. I can tell you that. All right. Okay. Let me ask you one more question. Okay, and then I will open the floor for some comments, and then come back to you. So you're not off the hook yet. You are still there. All right. Okay. It's very clear, and you made it very clear that there is a big issue with the climate justice situation. Very serious issue, okay? They had all the emissions and we are suffering the bad effect. It's very simple, and it's not, there is no need to go with any begging attitude, because we actually have a right, and we are, as a matter of fact, this continent happens to be the lungs of the entire world. So I mean, if you don't take care of this, you are not getting your own oxygen, for God's sakes, okay? So what would you specifically suggest to deal with the current climate injustice? We know the injustice, okay? 50% of the emissions are coming from 20 countries, or more than 50, okay? All of the continent does not contribute more than 3%, okay, of the emissions, and yet we are carrying the horrible thing. What would you ask for? You have the international organizations there. What would you ask for, okay? What would be your top priority thing to ask for in the COP if you are there? So you're going there without this begging attitude, you have an improved methodology for taking decisions, but what would you ask for in this particular element? Hannah.
You know, I'd say there's one action from a business leader from the global north that I've seen in the last few weeks that actually really inspired me. His name is Yvon Chouinard, and he's the head of Patagonia. And he's decided to dedicate his entire legacy to planet Earth. All the money that he's made in his career is going to a fund that is going to be dedicated to climate action projects. Of course, we need to monitor this. But I think governments in the global north that are massively overrepresented in such institutions need to not just create the nudges, but have the courage to create the structure that make this kind of action, this kind of decision from a business leader, the norm. So we need all the billionaires of North America, all the billionaires of Europe to actually understand that there's not a ticket out of planet Earth that is so free. you know, all of them that are making money in the tech space want to explore the rest of the universe, and this is all fantastic, but actually they hold a massive responsibility towards the rest of human beings on so many levels. So we need governments to have the courage to do that. In the US, it's crazy that most of the rich people can manage to get out of the taxation. We need a taxation system. We need a strong one that makes it so that it's not seen as going back to USSR, but actually creating a better and more intelligent capitalism or system of creating value that goes in the right direction and feeds the needs of human beings and the rest of the planet. So we need that courage from business leaders from the rest of the world. And we need that courage strengthened by governments that take those decisions, and there's no way out, and there's no blurry zone, and there's no, oh, we're still going to negotiate in the next conference, and so on and so forth, or we're just going to clap at the one business leader that took this decision, or a few groups of people that have managed to direct funding here and there. We need this to be the norm, and that takes action at the policy level. That would be my main request.
Okay, great. Sojoud, what would be your main request?
While I agree with her totally that there needs to be a reform when it comes to business and taxation and tax havens and just curbing this resource draining of Mother Earth, I think there needs to be more accountability from consumers, because business is only as profitable as you allow it to be. So if we engage consumers to be more conscious and hold companies more accountable, and before you buy a product, you make sure that the company pays livable wages, that they are not extractive, that if they are a company that relies on mining, that the mining is not done by children, that it follows international law, that they don't have, taxation shells and offshore bank accounts, that the rules apply to them. We will make sure by just being a more educated consumer, a more conscious consumers. And that is definitely something that will put just very extractive capitalist system on check. Because I think asking governments to stop companies and conglomerates and these huge multinational companies to stop, running tax havens, it's counterproductive, because they have super PACs that fund politicians. So that's a huge overhaul of the political system that would require, asking the wolf not to eat the sheep kind of thing. Politicians need donations from companies and rich people, and those donations are attached to tax breaks for the rich. Otherwise, they won't donate to them. So a whole reform of the system needs to happen. And that can only happen by a more educated voter and a more conscious consumer. So I think our challenge, and the challenge to the democratic systems of there, is to have a more educated, less fascist voter and consumer, to end this very I need consumer culture, and for people who want to buy things to hold the companies accountable. You buy things that are ethically sourced, that wages are paid. If Amazon factory workers don't have bathroom breaks, don't use Amazon. That would force them to reform and vocalize, we're not buying from you because of this. So they are forced to reform their business model to be more humane, to use less packaging, to pay more to fix the environment, to extract less. And I think that's a more communal approach and a more realistic approach than asking governments to, stop taking money from rich people.
That's actually quite an interesting angle. At the beginning, when you were talking, I thought you were talking about the people and the local governments, because we're asking about mining, and the mining is using children. Well, it's a local issue, but now you turned it into something that's a lot more serious, which is having a voter in the north who's informed. So I think one of your big roles as youth is to spread the knowledge about the bad things that are happening by those investors in your countries, so that the ethical human beings, okay, who, when they get the knowledge, they actually take a very strong stand, and they can boycott products and so on and so forth. Okay, not to discredit the taxation issue, but those are two approaches that need to be taken. Okay, Pato.
Thank you. So mine, I'm going to touch on 3. Firstly, again, the loss and damage facility. We can't have the global north or so-called developing countries causing a flood in Botswana, and then I need to go pay for my house because it got washed away by the actions of people in another country. And then secondly, accessible finance. Even the finance that's available currently that countries have committed to taking, that have pledged, one, they're not even meeting half the targets that they've pledged to, but also the little that is there is near impossible to access. I mean, you need to set up a whole new institution just to tap into this funding. So the funding that is available needs to be accessible, even if not for the individual, just for African countries. If we need to set up an institution over 3 years just to tap into this facility or this so-called available funding, are we not better off even just like empower, like supporting entrepreneurs and then just getting the taxes from there instead of now putting money into it? It doesn't make sense. And then on the using, let's say, child labor for certain minerals, mine is a bit more, yours is more realistic, mine is a bit more long-term, but a thing of these countries that are using these minerals from here should come and manufacture here, because by putting that distance between themselves and the resources, where they're getting the resources, they're then able to say, we don't know where our cobalt has come from, we don't know where our cobalt comes from, we don't know who's digging it up, we just know that we bought it from the nice guy at the corner and he said that it had been dug up by somebody, and so forth and forth, and we believed him. So instead of always just extracting money from Africa by selling us products and then extracting the minerals and then coming and extracting more money by making us just consumers, like Sojoud was saying earlier, where they're not adding actual value to the communities, we need to demand that some of these manufacturing happens here, so that the value add happens here, so that the economies that are growing are African economies, so that the people who are having their livelihoods sustained by the minerals from that country are the people of that country. And then my last one is also on fossil fuels. Right now, we're being told to keep our fossil fuels in the ground across Africa, which we all, I would say, agree on because of just the human rights violations against it, the health impacts that come out with that, and just the emissions and so forth. But then with keeping those emissions in the ground, we're being told to leave money that could sustain livelihoods, that could grow our economies in the ground. If we're going to keep, it's really hot here. If we're going to keep these minerals in the ground, if we're going to leave all this money underground, someone needs to pay for it. We can't be told that you can't touch your fossil fuels or your money in the ground because we say so until we need it, then you can. We saw this with Europe. No fossil fuels, and then Europe has an energy crisis. Now all of a sudden we can do fossil fuels. So we need to understand that we're working with people who are not dealing with us in good faith. If we're being told to leave our coal in the ground, we need to be like, if you can make money off my coal, I can make money off my coal in the ground. So we also need to appreciate the landscape of the politics that we're playing, and play the politics so that we're better for it as a continent, as a people, and our livelihoods can be sustained.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask you a question though. When you talk about manufacturing here, instead of just taking the goods basically from the ground and then doing the manufacturing outside, bringing the value added. When you talk to people from the West about this, they tell you, we're not sure. Governments are corrupt in those countries. We are not sure if value is going to come back to us. There are lots of problems with the governments and with the system. What would you suggest to get over that?
The funny thing is, when we talk about the issue of money flowing out of Africa, we always want to talk about corruption and not the illicit outflow of money. That's actually the real number that counts. But with that, it's a thing of, if, let's say Apple, for example, chooses to open, let's not use any names. If company A chooses to open a manufacturing plant in, do you know what? If they're going to say they want to play it safe, they open it in a country in Africa that's somewhat politically stable. That way, even where they're getting their minerals, they're not that far from. Therefore, they can be held accountable for what's happening within their production line. And companies will bend over backwards to make sure that their name is clean, which is why when they think they can't keep their name clean, they'll just say, we'll have nothing to do with that. If they're going to build a company here, it forces them to make sure that they go to the ground and make sure that they're in control of the full production line of the value chain. And that way they can take accountability for all these steps. When you're talking about corruption, a lot of them are corrupt anyway, but they go to, when you go to certain countries and you're doing business there, you can appeal to the public. You can appeal to different bodies that can help you maintain cleanliness if that's what you need. If there's a certain value that you're bringing to these communities. So on the corruption thing, there are a lot of countries. There are a lot of companies doing businesses in what would be termed as the most corrupt countries in the world. But then it's a thing of now that might force us to actually be accountable to the people of the country and not only our shareholders. Now we won't do business there. So it's just a thing of, is there willingness? And then if there's willingness, there will be a way that they'll find to do business, seeing as they're already doing business over there. Now they're just doing accountable business.
Okay. Hannah, would you like to add to that? Same angle?
We need to be a little bit frontal about this topic of corruption. I think those that are suffering corruption are very much the population, and I think everyone wants transparency and good governance that is very clear. And I think business leaders and public leaders from the West, from the North, equally, when they say, oh, we're reluctant to do more, etc., because we don't have the right counterparts and so on. Well, funny enough, a lot of the politicians that they would support and that they would vote for, when they receive corrupt leaders that bring money to their campaigns, there's no issue. There's no such issue. So at some point we have to say, listen, you want to get real about this urgency? Let's get real. We have the tools for transparency, and we have the tools to create systems that are non-corrupt with everyone on the same table. It's very possible. We have the means now. We have the technological means. If you have the business means, it's very possible to put this in place. So at this point, it's about calling them out on their willingness to actually address the challenges, and their willingness to also understand that people that are so removed from their realities because they don't see them day to day. It's, like it's somewhere in Africa that they consider one country, whereas it's like so diverse, so big, so large, and suffering all the consequences of climate change. From the moment they're able to give back the dignity to everyone and all the people and relate to and empathize and relate to their realities, then we'll say, you want to get real, you have the means, let's sit at the table and let's do something that's going to be very transparent and that's going to build over time with everyone with the same needs and appreciation for clean work and for transparency. I think it's about that. I think it's about courage, and it's about bringing people on the table when they are so reluctant to do it.
Okay, great. Sojoud, you want to add in the same area?
Yes, I agree with my co-panels, and I also think that young Africans need to be given credit for their ability to hold their leaders accountable, because corruption is generally run by a very small circle, and that's who European companies deal with. Like if she said, if it became an open source and knowledge shared information, where the issue is. Who's asking for money under the table? The population will force them to come clean or remove them from the office they're in. So it's an issue of transparency. But also, Africans need to know the value of the resources. So corrupt or not, we're the only people who have these resources. If we ask you to come and make a factory here and we refuse to sell you these things, we're just gonna not sell them to you. Where are you gonna get them from? This needs to be a power balance of a discussion. It's our resources, it's our copper, it's our gold. You make the things, you have the technology, but how are you gonna make it without our resources? Corrupt or not, if we stop the corruption here and we stop selling our resources to China that doubles the value and manufacture it and sells it to Europeans, this needs to stop. We need to clearly decide as young people in Africa that we have the resources, so we get to have the say-so. No more selling raw materials to Chinese companies. Just stop that point blank. If you want to make something that is African product, you need to bring it, teach the African factory workers, teach the African finance, build the African banks that you need this material for. Because without it, you can't have your product.
Benefit the people.
Yeah, and it's a value chain system. So you're not just making a factory, you're creating industries in universities and engineers, and there is nothing that African youth can't do. Because the brain drain from Africa that goes to Europe, that goes to America, these are African children. They're just educated over there, or they are educated in Africa and find better work out there. So there is no, even the immigration issue. People leave Africa because they can't find opportunities. They leave here with the education that they got from African schools. They finish their university in Africa and then go and apply to graduate school in Europe and work in European companies and work in European factories. So it needs to be a shift in thinking of this value of Africa for Africans kind of thing.
Okay,
it needs to be, if you're going to take our resources, you have to hire us. You have to do it in our country. Your standard of living depends on our resources. So you're just going to have to share it.
Okay, that's perfect.